TCU needs an impact wide receiver this offseason in the transfer portal. They should zero in on Stribling, the wideout from Oklahoma State. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Sonny Dykes said this in a press conference a few weeks ago when asked about the transfer portal, roster building, the future of this program, and what it's going to look like. He said wide receiver is going to be a priority. They're losing Savion Williams. They're losing Jack Besh. They're losing J.P. Richardson, Blake Knoll, who's been a key reserve for them, JoJo Earl. A lot of names and a lot of production leaving this team, and primarily Richardson, Besh, and Williams all being gone, and they all have their different roles. So that's a lot to, try to replace in one offseason. Eric McAllister will be back. There's some young guys they really like, but you need proven commodities, and they've made some offers. Chase Sowell from East Carolina, which is a name that's come up a lot. He's getting a lot of interest from a ton of different schools. I know Houston, Florida, many others are involved. Caleb Goody, who doesn't have the same numbers as some of the other guys I'm going to mention here, but did some nice things at Colorado State. He was offered by TCU. Joseph Manjack, who's based on some guys I've talked to from Houston who are plugged in that program, I think there's a good chance they could land Manjack. He's had a solid career at U of H after coming over from USC a few seasons ago. And a new name that's been added to the board, Jeremy Clark from 247 Sports. He reported this yesterday, having some contact and some communication with Stribling from Oklahoma State. And if that name rings familiar to you, if you watch that Oklahoma State game, he had a pretty good night against the Horned Frogs. Now, it wasn't his best night of the season, but put up some good stats against TCU, had a touchdown reception, had a catch late in that ball game where he caught it, made a stiff arm, got upfield, and put together some good yardage. This past season, 52 receptions, 882 yards, 6 touchdowns, 17 yards per catch. You look at the game log, he had 174 against Kansas State, 174 against Tulsa on 7 receptions with 2 touchdowns, 157 against K-State on 7 receptions with a touchdown, had that touchdown against TCU, had 101 yards, 7 receptions in that ball game, 7 for 123, and a touchdown against Texas Tech. The list goes on. He had a really good year. And before that, he spent 3 seasons at Oklahoma State. He was at Washington State for a year. And he put together his best season this past year, going for almost 900 yards. This is not also, sometimes you look at a guy who's playing on a team that's struggling. And Oklahoma State had a really rough year. They're actually adding Doug Meacham as their offensive coordinator. We're going to talk about that in segment 2. He'll be leaving the TCU coaching staff, but making a lot of wholesale changes. Mike Gundy kind of got in a standoff with the administration. Had a rough year. We all acknowledge that. So sometimes you can get a situation where it's like, well, somebody has to pile up some stats on a team that's having a lost season. And while Oklahoma State played from behind a lot and had to air it out at times, this is a dude. Like, Stribling's a really good player. And I think the best comparison or the best example of that is there's another really good receiver on this roster in Brendan Presley, who had 90 receptions this year. So Stribling had about 40 less receptions than Presley did, but he put together 882 yards. Presley had 767. So almost 100 more yards on 40 less receptions. He has that ability to stretch the field. And when you watch him play, you see a little bit of everything. There's definitely kind of the move the chains, possession type stuff, where you run an RPO, you fake the handoff, he sits down in the hole about 7 or 8 yards down the field, throw it to him on 1st and 10. Now you set yourself up with 2nd and 4, 2nd and 2. TCU does plenty of that, so he understands that aspect of it, but also had a flea flicker play against K-State where he caught the ball in a crossing pattern and just left everybody in the dust, showed off some real speed, getting down the sideline and taking it to the house. I mentioned that play against TCU where he caught it, planted his foot, turned around, reverse field, threw a stiff arm at somebody, and got about 20 more yards after the catch. He also has the ability to just win those one-on-one battles. You saw this against Tulsa, saw this a few times against Texas Tech, where it's just like, hey, my guy's better than your guy. I'm going to throw it up in the air and let him go get it. Good route runner. And then just has the ability with his ball skills to use his body, that big frame, to shield off a defender, go get the football, push off a little bit. You can get away with that if you're a wide receiver, go and high point the ball. Did that in the end zone against Tulsa and looked really impressive doing so. Hear me when I say this. I think that's an aspect, winning those one-on-one matchups in contested situations that TCU was missing at times this year. I am not saying he is better than the receivers that were on this roster. This, as a receiving group especially, was outstanding. This was an elite receivers group that they had this year. And it's part of the reason why Josh Hoover had such great numbers. But Savion Williams did it at times, and then later in the year, they kind of had to move him into this wildcat formation and almost into a running back spot, and then he would just, also run routes if he had to. Jack Besh had some situations where he won one-on-one matchups, but for Jack, it was more about getting separation through running good routes and kind of winning at the point of attack, getting a free release, those types of things. But at 6'2" and over 200 pounds, Stribling has that ability to go make plays. And if they start the season with Eric McAllister on one side and Stribling on the other, I feel really good about this receiving core. Going a step further, you're talking about a dude like Joseph Manjack, who's been very reliable through the years and has a couple nice seasons at U of H, along with Stribling and Eric McAllister, and then some young guys behind them, Doozy Ezekama, Kyle Baker, Braylon James, possibly Terry Shelton, even though we'll see what it looks like when he gets on campus. Then suddenly I think you've rebuilt this receiving room in a huge way, and maybe you don't totally replace the production that you're losing from this past year. And I didn't even mention like Jordan Bailey. I've said it before, man. I mean, potential is potential. You got to actually execute it. But I'm not super worried about this team and this coaching staff putting together playmakers on the outside. They've done it well. And that should be their sales pitch to Stribling. Like, hey, we figured out, not only have we figured out ways to make guys productive, we've done it in unique scenarios. Jack Besh before the season was not an outside wide receiver. Now, whether they actually decided that right before the Stanford game, like Sonny Dykes said in the Stanford postgame press conference, or that was something that they were working on all offseason, just became apparent to them during spring practice, bottom line is they moved him to the outside, and suddenly he became a total dude. And as long as he's healthy, I think he's going to have a shot to be drafted and make an NFL roster. I don't think I would have guessed that before the year. Savion Williams, middle of the year, kind of same story. Like, man, Savion's great, but wish we could find a way to get him more involved. Well, they found a way to get him more involved. And Stribling is more of your traditional line him up on the outside, let him go to work in those one-on-one passing situations. But returning quarterback, a great track record of making it work with big-time wideouts, and a very good receiver coach in Malcolm Kelly. TCU needs to make this happen. This would be target number one on my list. And I think you can still go after dudes like Chase Sowell and Caleb Goody, but Stribling would be the guy that I would circle and say, hey, we want to get this done. We want to make this happen. Let us know how we can do that. So I talked yesterday about Howard Sampson at the tackle position. I really feel like this is finally the year for TCU. There's some roster holes, but you don't need like wholesale changes in the portal. So make it a priority to use your resources and your time to go get the guys who are going to make the biggest difference. So for Howard Sampson, like, you need somebody at that tackle spot, go get him. You need somebody at receiver, go get him. Feels like safety is probably going to be another one of those positions where you have to make it happen. Defensive tackle, they're already making that a priority. They did that in the JUCO ranks. And then Ansel Mabou from Washington State, who had 6 sacks last year, originally from Aledo. Lock in on those guys. That's 3 or 4 players that if you land them, I think that moves the needle a lot going into 2025, and you can quickly get them integrated and plugged into what you want to do. It shouldn't mess much with your chemistry. There shouldn't be the need for a lot of onboarding. Like, you can just hit the ground running with this team, have a solid showing in bowl game, and get ready for the offseason. So De'Zhaun Stribling, a name to know, the Oklahoma State wide receiver, almost 900 yards last season, You look at his year-by-year breakdown, dealt with some injuries in 2023, so didn't have a great year in Stillwater, 14 receptions, 198 yards. But before that, 51 for 602. That was at Washington State, and then 44 for 471 at Washington State in 2021. So when he's been healthy, he's been productive, and you've seen a gradual uptick each and every year. And again, he just looks like the type of guy who can do it all. Win those one-on-one matchups where you're like, hey, I'm going to throw this ball up there, go get it, go make a play, whether that's in the red zone or on 1st and 10. You want to throw outside fade pattern towards the sideline. Pretty well versed in the short and intermediate RPO game where those quick hitters, you're just trying to get some positive yardage on first down, set yourself up in second and third and manageable, and then that breakaway speed that he showed at times too, and just the ability to plant his foot in the ground, get upfield, make a move, throw a stiff arm, get yards after the catch. That was really significant for TCU and their offense this year as they try to go after somebody to replace this wide receiver spot, all the production they're missing there. And I think the bowl game will be really important from the perspective of what young guys do they trust and who's ready to step up and make plays. Because there will be opportunities. Even when we talk about these transfers coming in, I said this yesterday, it's a real balance and it's a real dilemma. At what point do you start to say, okay, we need the guys that we have recruited and have had in the system for a couple of years to start developing, making plays, but also in the immediate, there's a need here who can step up and be that guy for us. And I think if you add two veteran wide receivers who can be starters, that'd be great. And then, I mean, TCU rotates that position group out a lot. So it's not like your young guys feel like they're getting just completely passed over here. So is it Braylon James stepping up? Is it Ezekama making plays in the New Mexico Bowl? And suddenly you're like, okay, good to know. Who has chemistry with Josh Hoover? Who has chemistry with Haas Haney? These are all things that you can figure out in practice over the next few weeks that will give you a better idea of where to go moving forward. When we come back, a change on the coaching staff, a veteran presence, guy that's been around a while, has had multiple stints here, was a holdover from the Gary Patterson era. He is moving on to take a job at Oklahoma State. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. Game time. I make it easy for you. I've been looking at basketball tickets. I need to get my kids up there for a women's game and a men's game this year. Download the Gametime app today. You can use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. A few things I love about the Gametime app. You can get last-minute deals. If you're someone who likes to say, hey, I think that price is going to come down. I'm going to wait it out. I'm not going to buy 3 weeks in advance. It'll be okay. You can do that with the Gametime app. They'll sell you a ticket even as the game starts if you want to wait that long. And just wait out people who are like, man, I desperately need to make something off this. It's very easy. The tickets go right to your app, so you don't have to worry, like, where is this going? What's next? What's happening here? They make it simple for you. They show you a picture of what your view is going to be from your seat when you sit down, so you can prepare for that. If there's any, like, visual barriers. Also, it's no hidden fees. They tell you what the fees are up front. There's fees. Don't get me wrong. They're trying to make money like everybody else, but hey. They tell you what they are before you go to checkout, so you don't suddenly hit, let's go make the purchase, and it's like, wait, why am I paying $70 more than I expected? Download the Gametime app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions, as always, do apply. Okay, so a change in the coaching staff for TCU football. I said this after the regular season wrapped up. I was like, I don't expect any coordinator changes. Now, there's always the possibility somebody gets a head coaching job. Andy Avalos, his name came up in the UNLV search, but quickly Dan Mullen emerged as the dude there, and it looks like they're going to get that worked out. So didn't happen. But Andy Avalos and Kendall Briles are very well respected in the industry and among other coaches. So ADs, et cetera, I wouldn't be shocked if another opportunity came around. But I think I feel like 95% sure that the coordinators are going to stay the same. So if there were any changes, I felt like it would be at the position coach level. This was honestly, if you were like, which position coach do you think would move on? This would be one of the last ones on my list. Doug Meacham getting an opportunity as an offensive coordinator. And I only say that because Doug had a chance as a play caller earlier in his career, did a really great job as a co-OC in 2014, 2015. And I believe it was after the 2016 season, he left for Kansas, and Sonny Cumbie took over the OC role on his own. Kansas situation didn't work out. He took a little bit of time off. Then Gary Patterson hired him again as the inside receivers coach. That's where he's been ever since. But now getting to go back to his alma mater. He worked at Oklahoma State for a long time and getting another chance to be an offensive coordinator. I'm excited for him. And the only reason I would have had him low on the list is because he's been at TCU for a long time, and I just didn't think he would get a play calling opportunity. I thought if somebody offered him a gig, it would probably be a very similar wide receivers coach role, and he would just say, well, it doesn't make sense for me to make that jump at this time. I'll just stay here and continue to churn out talent. The thing about Doug that I think stood out in his tenure here, the guys just loved him. I mean, he was always really well respected amongst the players, great recruiter. TCU has become known for speedy guys in the slot who make impact not only catching the ball, but on special teams, whether it's Kavontae Turpin, Darius Davis, J.P. Richardson's been a really solid pickup the last couple of years. You know, you go way back in the not way back in the day, but you go back to like Des White, those days. Doug has had his hand in recruiting a lot of those players, and has done a fantastic job finding talent there and finding dudes who are just next level with what they can do from a speed perspective. So I don't know what direction TCU will go now, but it's a loss in the fact that, I mean, he's been a huge part of this program for a long time. As I said, he was a holdover from the Gary Patterson era, which I think was a huge compliment to just the kind of gravitas and respect that he carried within the program. You sort of understood on the defensive side why they stayed with that, because the defense, it wasn't great towards the end, but for such a long time, it was such a great defense. And Sonny having an offensive background, I mean, you wanted some continuity there. But offensively, if there was a spot where, if there was a side of the ball where you thought Sonny would come in and just say, hey, we're going to clean house and change things up, he could have done it there. But Malcolm Kelly and Doug Meacham stuck around, did some really nice things. Ed Small is a guy they have in this current recruiting class that if you talk to people who are really plugged into high school football, he put up crazy numbers at Anderson High School in Austin. And there's a lot of murmurs about maybe this is not the highest rated guy, but if we want to talk about impact players from day one and dudes who could step in and make things happen, Ed Small's name keeps coming up in conversations of this is the guy who can make plays and be a dude for you right away. And again, that's who Doug Meacham is. He was a Texas baseball commit and just continued to produce on the football field to a point where Meacham was like, hey, we got to have this guy. And along with the rest of the coaching staff, went ahead and made it happen. So, yeah, it's a loss. Good luck to him. Doug always seemed like a really solid dude and just a good guy. And I'm very intrigued to see what it looks like with him at Oklahoma State, because he's a true air raid dude. I mean, we're talking like old school Leach disciple guy. And you don't see that as much anymore. It's evolved a lot in the past couple decades, especially the last decade with what like Lincoln Riley has done with it, and many others that have added their own spin to it, that have put more emphasis on running the ball. And what Kendall Briles does is very different than the early days of the air raid. And Doug is that kind of coach. So curious to see what he has to work with and what he goes after at Oklahoma State. And I hope it works for him. I know it's kind of a risky move in that Mike Gundy is suddenly sort of in the crosshairs there with the admin with a tough season, but This is a guy that he's comfortable with and knows well, and so they're going to try to make this happen and work together. But Doug Meacham, best of luck to you moving on, and TCU will now have to replace that inside receiver spot on the coaching staff. When we come back, we'll get into some of your thoughts about the week that was. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. FanDuel, where the game starts. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. You make one $5 bet. You hit on that bet, you get $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app, get $150 in bonus bets by hitting on one $5 bet. And listen, you can live bet NFL games. So if you're watching the Cowboys, please seek help. But if you're doing that and you're like, they're going to find, if they're leading, you're like, they're going to find a way to blow this again, you can live bet on that action. You can do it at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. It's not just NFL, NBA, bowl season's coming up. College basketball's in full swing. It's all available to you. A great time to try it out. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. FanDuel, it's where the game starts. They're a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. Quick note, I saw this from Mac Engel. He spoke with Jeremiah Donati as he was on his way out. And I know you guys won't expect anything different, but I'm just passing it along. He said that TCU did not turn down the Liberty Bowl. Basically, they got one opportunity. It was in the New Mexico Bowl. That's what they took. And so there you go. That is the official stance of the athletic department. Still think it's really weird how all those dominoes fell and they ended up in Albuquerque, but you got to go play the game, and chance to go in the season with a win against the Louisiana team that was 10-3 and dealt with some quarterback injuries. Don't know what the health is going to be like, but they got beat pretty bad in that conference title game after being down to the third string QB. I know they've had some guys at the transfer portal as well. Intriguing matchup though, and we'll see how it shakes out here in a couple of weeks. Yesterday, I talked about TCU trying to go and get Howard Sampson, big lineman out of North Carolina. They briefly had him committed last offseason before he moved on to UNC. He played at UNT for a couple of years. I also talked about the bowl game and how they're approaching that. Frog fan says he just said agree, which I love that. Everybody should just comment they agree with everything I say. Not sure if he was talking about the transfer situation. I'm going to assume that's the case. Yeah, I think this is a big target in more ways than one. He's obviously just a big dude, but also this would be really significant for your team. I think they're going to figure out how to get a couple big-time wideouts in here. And you look at what they've done over the past few seasons, that hasn't been a problem. The problem on offense has just been finding consistency, especially in the run game. And that boils down to having a better offensive line. And so Sampson would give you some solid play there and just a way to kind of bridge that gap. I think the interior line is going to be pretty good. You need help on the edge with your tackles. This will be a really good pickup. As far as the bowl game goes, Richard Berry says, I'd like to see it as a preseason game. Put your up-and-comers in there in the second half, especially with Haney. Let's see what this team has youth-wise. Yeah, that's an interesting way to approach it. I mean, I think you could look at it that way. But the bottom line is you still got to win the game, and you still need to do what you can to do that. But I think this is a great opportunity with all the extra time to prepare to integrate some guys who didn't play a lot this season. And just as Richard said, see what you got. See what you have going into next year. Jack Daddy Slim says, even though Hoover had a decent season stat-wise, he led the Big 12 in many categories. TCU will be much better as soon as they bench Hoover for Haney. Then we'll be cooking. Well, it's worth noting that Jack Daddy Slim is an Aledo Bearcat, or I know he at least lives in that area. And I love Hoss Haney. I think there's definitely some things he can do in the run game that Josh Hoover can't. I feel like this is going to be a very interesting offseason with the quarterback position, because I'm not sure when they recruited Hoss if they thought Josh was going to be a long-term guy or if he was going to be kind of a bridge to the next season. But bottom line is Josh had a really good year. And so now things get muddied a little bit. But I do feel like this is a great chance to get Hoss in the game, let him throw the ball around and make some plays, and just see where you're at. Frog fan says, do you see TCU being ranked to start off next year to make the game look larger and be on Friday in prime time, like what happened with Deion in Colorado? I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say no, they won't be ranked. I just feel like that's kind of the general vibe with the national media in the Big 12 right now. I think they were ranked. I'm not sure they were ranked because of the fact that they were playing Dion. I think they were ranked that season because they were coming off a national championship appearance, and a lot of people bought into the fact of like, okay, Sonny Dykes is going to figure out a way to carry over that momentum, and unfortunately they didn't. So if I had to guess right now, I'd say no, they won't be ranked, but that's going to be a big game. It'll be in prime time, I would imagine. And yeah, another famous coach, very famous coach, gets his college football debut. Well, in Dion's case, it wasn't college football debut, but I guess FBS debut against TCU. We'll be back on Monday. Thank you for rocking with us this week. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.